What is an abstraction? In the most simple way, I look at it as a layer between a developer and the underlying implementation. It adds a layer of access to functionality of data that should ideally make development easier. So what makes for a good abstraction? Is it the amount of layers, the type of abstraction, or even having no abstraction at all? I have my own views and guidelines about abstraction that I find helpful when working on projects, so I wanted to share them in this series. So let's start with the first guideline, consistent representation. Feature or mechanic should be represented in a predictable and unambiguous manner. This might sound similar to single responsibility principle, but I look at it as less granular. Single responsibility principle says that there should only be one reason for a function, class, or module to change, so you get very segregated functionality. Consistent representation doesn't say anything about reasons to change or responsibility. It is more about how data and functionality is represented and how easy it is to reason about it in your project. To make it more clear, let's go over an example. Let's say we have a character, ability component attached to the character, and a data asset set in ability component. In the character we have activate ability and activate cooldown functions. In the ability component we have a list of ability effects and execute ability function that triggers sequence of events related to currently selected ability. And in data asset we have information about the ability like name, image, and cooldown time. To activate an ability, you call activate ability function, and it calls activate cooldown and execute ability function on the ability component. Activate cooldown gets information about cooldown time from the data asset. Then ability effects update from data asset based on the type of ability. As you can see, things are all over the place. Reasoning about this system gets confusing, anyone new will have trouble understanding or making changes to the system, and even you will have trouble with it if you come back to it a month later. So let's see how we can modify it. First, it would be better if we moved all of the functionality related to abilities into the ability component. Then let's move ability effects to data asset. Now we have data and functionality in places where they can be changed more easily and are easier to reason about. We can also remove executability functions since we already have activate ability that we can trigger from the character. Great, now it's way easier to reason and think about the ability system. So what happens if you have functionality related to ability that can be put inside of the ability component? For example, in blueprints, there is a timeline node that in this example could only be triggered inside of the character. Timeline node lets you easily create curves and animate variables, so it would be nice to use it to animate the camera for the specific abilities. So what should you do? We don't want to break our consistent representation of abilities, right? Well, maybe. So let's think about how we can solve this. First, this functionality could be unnecessary, meaning we can reasonably replace it in ability component. If there is a way that you could replicate this functionality in ability component without sacrificing too much of something you care about, like performance or development time, then you should do the alternative to the timeline in the ability component. So exclude the timeline node. If it is necessary, meaning you can't reasonably replicate it or is impossible to do it in the ability component, then you should try to generalize it. This way it won't be just one-off ability functionality that is placed inside of the character. Instead of having ability camera animation, we could try to generalize it into a character camera animation system. If you can't even generalize it because it is too specific, then there is only one option left. Just make an exception. Sometimes we can't have ideal solutions, so good luck. I wanted to start this series with a simple guideline, but the next one might be a bit more controversial, so if you feel like you disagree or have some thoughts about it, feel free to leave a comment, and while you're at it, press that like button. See you in the next one.